Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Pulse Europe 2017. It's great to have you here. Unlike past Pulses, we're going to start this one on a very serious note. I have something really important to talk about, and that is the history of customer success. I take this very seriously because I am the self-appointed customer success historian. For those of you who have read our book, the first chapter is mostly dedicated to the beginning, the origin of customer success, and how it started at Salesforce. I realized after I moved to Europe 15 months ago that the way I had approached understanding the history of customer success had been very typically American. Customer success is a really good thing, therefore it had to have been invented in America, right? And it's technology-oriented, so of course it had to come from Silicon Valley. And so for those reasons, I came to the conclusion that customer success started at Salesforce. In the beginning, Mark Benioff said our churn rate is too high and we should do something about that. And probably early on, in the US at least, the history of customer success looked something like this. Salesforce at the beginning, and then several other companies. I haven't worried too much about the order of numbers 2, 3, and 4, but it probably looked something like this after the first couple years. And then I moved to Europe, and I said, I wonder if I've done the right thing by thinking that this started in the US. And so I started to do some research in Europe. I felt I owed it to everybody. And one of the things that I promised myself when I moved over here is that I wouldn't be that arrogant American. I wouldn't assume that everything good comes from America, and we wouldn't make those kinds of mistakes. And by the way, this event is a pretty good example of that. We've tried really hard to make sure that this is not an American event that just happens in Europe or in London, but that it's a European event. So most of the speakers that you'll see this week are going to be European speakers, or they may be Americans working for European companies or based here. So we want you to hear from the people who understand your territory, not just how it was done in the US. Now, there will be a couple of exceptions to that, but for the most part, we're going to parade Europeans up here. So I'm trying really hard to make sure that we're evolving customer success and the way that we think about it alongside of those who are here and not necessarily in Silicon Valley, because that's a whole different world unto itself. But back to Europe. So I needed to do some research to figure out, where did customer success begin in Europe? Was it just a follow-on to what had happened in Silicon Valley, or was it more than that? Well, I took the approach that many historians have taken over the years, and that is one of the ways to understand culture and cultural movements is to look at the artists. The music, the writing, the paintings often tell us what happened and how that happened. And so I took that same exact approach. And I found some actually really startling things, and I'm revealing them here for the very first time today. So I focused mostly on writers. I said, what are the great writers of Europe? What have they written that would give me some kind of clue about whether or not customer success started here as an American thing or started here on its own? It's really interesting, actually. I found that customer success may very well have started in Europe long before it ever started in the US. And I took that from the writings of some of the most influential writers in European history. And in particular, this first writing that you'll see comes from somebody I think everyone will agree is one of the most influential writers in European history. And it's really clear if you think about these words that this person actually was a customer success manager or knew something about customer success. Because if there had been voicemail back in the day, this particular writing probably would have come straight from a voicemail that he got from one of his customers.
Help, I need somebody. Help, not just anybody. Help, you know I need someone. Help.
I told you this was going to be serious, right? Well, the same writer knew something else about customer success that many of you have experienced, which is, You know, one day you love a customer, the next day not so much, the next day you love them again, the back and forth.
Yesterday, all my troubles seemed so far away. Now it looks as though they're here to stay. Oh, I believe in yesterday.
Okay, raise your hand if you've been there. One day they're happy, the next day, yeah, not so much. Well, as you guys all know, anything that John, Paul, George, and Ringo did, their friends Keith and Mick probably did something like it as well. Maybe before, depends on who you're a fan of, maybe afterwards. And it sounds to me like Mick might have actually known something about a customer that many of you know who thinks that you are their personal valet. Another scenario that the Stones apparently were quite familiar with is one that you guys know, and that is every once in a while you do find a customer that you really love. They get you, you get them, you love talking to them, they use your product, they renew their contracts, they don't hassle you at all. The problem is at some point in that relationship, your boss comes to you and wants to talk about a territory realignment. Now, one thing that was really cool, every once in a while I came across something that needed absolutely no explanation, no interpretation.
Bicycle, bicycle, bicycle. I want to ride my bicycle, bicycle, bicycle. I want to ride my bicycle. I want to ride my bike. I want to ride my bicycle. I want to ride it where I like.
Now, if you don't get how that relates to customer success, neither do I. And frankly, I don't think anybody in the world knows what that song is about. Now, there's even more contemporary research and history that says customer success not only started maybe back in the 60s in Europe, but continued on even into the 90s and the early 2000s. And I know most of you have been in this situation at some point with a customer, which is they ask you for something and you promise them that you know that you have a document that will answer their question. And so you go and look for that document and you have trouble finding it. I'm not sure how organized everybody is, not me, but I always have trouble finding documents no matter how well they're organized somewhere. And then the problem is before you can actually find it, customer calls you on the phone and all you can do is make an excuse. Now, I've managed a bunch of customer success people in my day, and I know one of the things that happens is you get into these dysfunctional relationships with your customers, what we would call codependency, right? And I know you've all been there. Don't lie to me, and don't shake your head that this hasn't happened to you, and it feels something like this.
With or without you.
So my conclusion is that customer success started in Europe long before it started in the US, and I think we've proven that. I have one more example. This one's actually a little trickier because it took even more research, because the words that were published were not actually the original words, and the original words tell us everything about customer success. We all think that the NPS survey methodology was invented pretty recently. Apparently, that's not quite true. So you'll have familiarity with this song, and I'll fill in at the end of it what the original words were. She's vying for an NPS of at least 7. Thank you.